Imagine you're a 55-year-old man lying in your Volkswagen Beetle in the middle of a frozen forest at midnight. You just had a mild heart attack. You can't walk. And then you see headlights approaching through the snow. You scream for help, but instead of rescue, the figures outside go completely silent. The headlights snap off. Darkness swallows everything. A moment later, you see flashlight beams drifting through the trees. You call out again, and again. The lights go dead. The next morning, you discover an abandoned car sitting exactly where you heard those voices. The engine works perfectly. The gas tank isn't empty, but whoever was inside is gone. This isn't a horror movie. This actually happened, and it's called the American Giant Law of Pass. February 1978, Yuba City, California. There was a group of 5 close friends. Their families called them the Boys, even though the oldest was 32 and the youngest was 24, because these men weren't like other adults. Ted Wire, 32, had the body of a linebacker but the soul of a gentle child. He worked odd jobs but had to quit because his slow processing caused too many problems. Jack Madruga, 30, was an Army veteran and the only one with a driver's license. He loved his 1969 Mercury Montego more than anything in this world. He never, ever let anyone else touch the steering wheel. Bill Sterling, 29, was a quiet, deeply religious young man who spent his free time reading at the library, hoping to bring knowledge to patients in psychiatric hospitals. Jackie Hewitt, 24, had the most visible cognitive disability in the group. He could barely make a phone call on his own. He depended entirely on Ted for everything. And then there was Gary Mathias, 25, U.S. Army veteran, discharged for psychiatric reasons after a drug-related incident while stationed in Germany. Gary suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia. When he took his medication, stelazine and cogentan, he was completely normal. He even helped his stepfather's landscaping business. But if he stopped taking his pills, he would rapidly spiral into acute psychosis, hallucinations, paranoia, violence. Police records show he had a history of assaulting people during episodes. In the group, Gary was the smartest, the natural leader, the one with military survival training, but he was also a ticking time bomb. These 5 men shared one passion, basketball. They were the core players of the Gateway Gators, a team from their rehabilitation center. The next morning, Saturday, they were scheduled to compete in a regional Special Olympics tournament in Sacramento. The prize for winning: a week-long trip to Los Angeles. For men who rarely left their parents' homes, this was the dream of a lifetime. That Friday afternoon, they washed their sneakers, folded their uniforms, laid everything neatly on their beds, told their families to wake them up early. None of them had any intention of going anywhere except home to sleep, and then straight to the game. That evening, the 5 of them piled into Madruga's Mercury Montego and drove 46 miles north to Chico State University to watch a college basketball game between UC Davis and Chico State. The game ended around 10 p.m. After leaving the arena, they stopped at a convenience store called Bears Market. The cashier remembered them clearly because they walked in at 9:55, 5 minutes before closing. They bought 2 Pepsis, a quart of milk, 2 Hostess pies, and 2 candy bars, road snacks for the 1-hour drive home. They walked out of the store, got in the car, and vanished into the night. Instead of heading south on Highway 70, a straight, familiar, well-lit road back to Yuba City, the car made a fatal turn. It went northeast into a winding mountain road covered in snow and gravel, deep into the Plumas National Forest, over 70 miles from Chico. A low-riding sedan crawling over jagged rocks and deep snow ruts in pitch darkness. But when police examined the undercarriage days later, they found something strange. Not a single scratch, not one dent. Whoever was behind the wheel that night drove with extraordinary precision, like someone who knew this road intimately. And then the car got stuck on a snowdrift. But here's what makes no sense. 5 grown men could have easily pushed that car free in minutes. The engine ran perfectly. Police hot-wired it later, and it started right up. The gas tank was still a quarter full. The keys were gone, but they abandoned everything, stepped out of a warm car into sub-zero temperatures, without winter coats. Ted Wire had left the house that evening without even grabbing a jacket, and Gary Mathias had left his antipsychotic medication at home because he planned to be back in time for his next dose. Remember the man I described at the beginning? That was Joseph Shones, 55 years old, sitting in his Volkswagen Beetle with chest pain. He had driven up the mountain earlier that evening to check snow conditions at his cabin. His car got stuck. Then the heart attack hit. Sometime between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, Shones saw headlights approaching from behind. A car pulled up and stopped nearby. He could see a group of people standing around the vehicle, talking to each other. And here's the detail that will haunt you. Shones swore he saw the silhouette of a woman holding a baby in the middle of a frozen mountain forest. At midnight, Shones yelled for help. The response chilled him to the bone. The group went instantly silent. The headlights switched off. Total darkness. Later, he saw flashlight beams moving through the trees. He called out again. The flashlights immediately died. By dawn, Shones's car had run out of gas. His pain had eased enough to walk. He hiked 8 miles down to a lodge to call for help. When he returned for his car, he discovered the Mercury Montego sitting abandoned exactly where he had heard the voices the night before. Shones' testimony was deemed credible by police, but it opened a Pandora's box of questions. Who were those people? Was the woman with a baby real or a hallucination caused by his heart attack? The plot thickened 2 days later. A female store clerk 30 miles from the scene reported seeing at least 4 young men matching the Yuba County Five's descriptions. They stepped out of a red pickup truck from the 1950s. And they were accompanied by unfamiliar men. A red truck, strange men, 5 vulnerable young men who should have been home sleeping. Something happened that night in Chico, and whatever it was, it sent them driving straight into the mountains to die. The snow melted in June of 1978. A group of dirt bikers riding deep in the forest smelled something rotting coming from a U.S. Forest Service trailer. The trailer sat 19.4 miles from where the car was abandoned. Let that sink in. 19 miles, on foot, uphill, through deep snow, in the dark, in leather shoes. Inside the trailer, police found the body of Ted Wire lying on a bed. And what the forensic examination revealed was beyond disturbing. Based on the length of his beard growth, medical examiners determined that Wire had survived inside that trailer for 8 to 13 weeks. 2 to 3 months. He died an agonizingly slow death from starvation and hypothermia. His body weight had dropped from nearly 200 pounds to just 118. His body was wrapped tightly from head to toe in 8 layers of bedsheets and military blankets. The edges were neatly tucked under the mattress, forming what looked like a cocoon or a burial shroud. Police stated that a man dying of starvation and exposure could not possibly have wrapped himself this precisely. Someone else was in that trailer with him, someone who cared for him, who wrapped him up as he slipped into a coma. and who may have sat there in silence, watching him take his final breath before walking away. Now here's the part that breaks your brain. Inside and around the trailer, there were enough sea rations and dehydrated food packets to feed all 5 men for over a year. A military-grade can opener was sitting right there on the table, but in 3 months, only 12 cans had been opened. Weyer starved to death surrounded by food. The trailer had a propane tank connected to a working heater. One twist of the valve and the entire space would have been warm for months. No one ever touched that valve. The window had been smashed open, probably to break in initially, letting freezing air pour in constantly. No one tried to cover the hole. Books, paper, clothes, all flammable materials were scattered everywhere, but there was zero evidence of anyone ever starting a fire. Weyer's feet were severely frostbitten, blackened with gangrene. His leather shoes were missing, but Gary Mathias' tennis shoes were found lying inside the trailer. The theory: Mathias' feet had swollen so badly from frostbite that he couldn't fit into his own shoes anymore. So in one final act of survival or madness, he took the larger leather shoes off of Weyer, who was either dying or already dead. And he walked out of that trailer, into the forest, into nothing. Days after finding the trailer, search teams discovered the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling on either side of a mountain path, about 11 miles from the abandoned car. Halfway between the car and the trailer, they appeared to have collapsed from exhaustion and frozen to death on the very first night. Or they were left behind. Closer to the trailer, Jackie Hewitt's scattered bones were found. Animals had gotten to them. His father identified him by his jawbone. And Gary Mathias, never found. Tracking dogs, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers combing the forest. Gary Mathias evaporated from the face of the earth like a ghost. His name remains on the FBI's missing persons list to this day. For decades, local authorities maintained that this was simply a weather-related accident. A group of confused young men who took a wrong turn and froze. Case closed. But in October 2023, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, a mountain of original investigation files were finally declassified, and what they revealed was explosive. Yuba County authorities had internally classified this as a homicide/missing person case from the beginning. Not an accident. They knew. They always knew. In one declassified internal police memo, investigators wrote a chilling note, and I quote, "It was in the best interest of all parties involved that this letter never reached the Mathias family." Why? Because police suspected either that Gary Mathias was the victim of foul play, or that Mathias himself had killed his 4 friends during a psychotic episode. Either way, they buried it. Some reports even indicate that a man named Gary Whiteley made incriminating statements connected to the case, but police never pursued prosecution. In early 2024, author Tony Wright published a book compiling massive amounts of data from the declassified files and interviews with the victims' families. Wright didn't accuse police of conspiracy, but he condemned their incompetence, their refusal to accept FBI assistance, their failure to deploy search dogs promptly, their negligence that likely cost these 5 men their only slim chance of survival. So what really happened? There are 3 main theories. Theory 1, the psychotic break. Gary Mathias didn't bring his antipsychotic medication that night because he planned to be home soon. As the car drove through the darkness, Mathias began experiencing a severe psychotic episode. He hallucinated enemies pursuing them, monsters in the trees. He screamed at Madruga to drive faster, to go off-road, to flee into the mountains. Madruga, easily intimidated and confused, complied. When the car got stuck, Mathias ordered everyone to abandon the vehicle and run. The 4 obedient, trusting men followed a man who had lost his mind. He led them 20 miles through the snow to the trailer, used his army skills to open the sea rations, but as his brain deteriorated further without medication, he lost the ability to understand that they needed warmth. He wrapped Vire in blankets with distorted care. Then he took Vire's shoes and walked into the forest, chasing phantoms only he could see. Theory 2. Foul play. Matthias, with his history of violence, provoked a confrontation with local thugs in Chico after the basketball game. The gang followed them, forced Madruga to drive up the mountain at gunpoint, and dumped the 5 men in the freezing wilderness as a form of torture. They may have kept Vire in the trailer as a captive, controlling his food, psychologically breaking him until he couldn't even save himself. The red truck, the strange men, the woman with a baby. All pieces of a puzzle that points to something far more sinister. Theory 3. Paradoxical undressing and terminal burrowing. Medical science tells us that in the final stages of hypothermia, blood vessels in the skin malfunction, flooding the brain with a false signal that the body is burning. Victims frantically strip off their clothes in the snow. Then, the reptilian brain kicks in. A primitive survival instinct that drives people to squeeze into tight spaces and hide, like a wounded animal crawling into a hole. This could explain Vire wrapped in 8 layers of blankets, but it doesn't explain the neatly tucked edges. Someone was still thinking clearly enough to care for him. But no matter which theory you believe, the biggest questions remain unanswered. Why didn't they eat when food was within arm's reach? Why didn't they turn on the heater? And where is Gary Matthias? The Yuba County 5 case teaches us something about fear. Real terror doesn't come from blood and gore. It comes from the impossibility of understanding why human beings chose death when survival was right in front of them. If you have your own theory, drop it in the comments below. Subscribe to 4AT and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next case. Because some stories don't have endings.